I remember before the war, there's some things that are really stayed in my head, and I remember being a happy little girl and being in a summer home.
The cold winds of war swept across Europe in the early 1940s, bringing with them a tide of fear, destruction, and unspeakable cruelty. In the heart of Belgium, a young Catholic woman named Jeanne Daman found herself at a crossroads. Born into a modest family, Jeanne's life had been unremarkable until the shadow of the German occupation darkened her homeland. As the streets of Brussels became increasingly hostile, particularly towards the Jewish population, Jeanne's conscience stirred. What began as a simple act of compassion would soon spiral into a dangerous commitment to saving lives, a journey that would define her legacy. Belgium, like much of Europe, was caught in the iron grip of the Third Reich. The occupation brought with it a systematic campaign against the Jews, marked by discriminatory laws, forced relocations, and eventually, the horrors of the Holocaust. The Germans were meticulous in their efforts to dehumanize the Jewish population, stripping them of their rights, their property, and eventually, their lives. It was during these early years of occupation that Jeanne first encountered the stark reality of German persecution. The Jewish community in Brussels, which had once been a vibrant part of the city's fabric, was now living in fear. The enforcement of anti-Jewish laws meant that Jewish children were barred from attending public schools, and Jewish-owned businesses were marked for closure. It was in this atmosphere of growing dread that Jeanne took up a teaching position at a Jewish kindergarten. Here, she came face to face with the innocent victims of German hatred, children who, despite their youth, were already feeling the heavy weight of the war. At the Jewish kindergarten, Jeanne's role was more than just that of a teacher. She became a pillar of support for the children and their families, offering not only education, but also a sense of normalcy in an increasingly abnormal world. The children, too young to fully understand the horrors around them, found comfort in Jeanne's presence. She taught them, played with them, and in many ways, shielded them from the harsh realities of the occupation. But the situation in Brussels was deteriorating rapidly. As the Germans intensified their efforts to identify and deport Jews, the kindergarten was forced to close. For Jeanne, this was a turning point. The children she had grown so fond of were now in grave danger, and she knew she had to do something. It was no longer enough to provide comfort. She had to take action. Jeanne's transition from teacher to resistance fighter was a gradual but inevitable one. She began by helping Jewish families find hiding places, using her connections within the community to locate safe havens. But as the situation grew more dire, Jeanne's involvement deepened. She became a member of the Comité de Défense des Juifs, CDJ, a Jewish defense committee that played a crucial role in the Belgian resistance. With the CDJ, Jeanne took on increasingly dangerous missions. She helped forge identity papers, smuggled children out of the city, and coordinated with other resistance members to move them to safe locations in the countryside or across the border. Each mission was a race against time, with the ever-present threat of discovery by the Gestapo. Jeanne knew that if she were caught, it would mean certain passing, not just for her, but for the children she was trying to save. Among the many children Jeanne helped was a young girl named Sarah. Sarah's family had been torn apart by the war. Her father was arrested and sent to a concentration camp, and her mother was in hiding. Jeanne took it upon herself to protect Sarah, forging documents that gave her a new identity and finding a Catholic family willing to shelter her. For months, Jeanne visited Sarah in secret, bringing food, clothes, and news from her mother. Despite the fear and uncertainty, Sarah survived the war, thanks to Jeanne's tireless efforts. Another poignant story is that of the Cohen family. With the Germans closing in, Jeanne helped the Cohens go into hiding. She found a small attic space in a sympathetic family's home and smuggled the Cohens there under the cover of night. For nearly 2 years, Jeanne was their lifeline, bringing them supplies and updates on the war's progress. When Brussels was finally liberated, the Cohens emerged from their hiding place emaciated but alive, forever grateful to the woman who had risked everything for them. The work Jeanne did was fraught with danger. The Gestapo had eyes and ears everywhere, and informants were a constant threat. Jeanne had several close calls, moments when a wrong move or a chance encounter could have led to her capture. There was the time she was nearly caught while delivering forged documents. A German soldier's suspicion was only allayed by Jeanne's quick thinking and fluency in German. On another occasion, a routine check nearly exposed her involvement with the resistance, but Jeanne's composed demeanor and carefully crafted cover story saved her life. Living with this constant threat took a toll on Jeanne. The stress of the war, the fear for her own life, and the lives of those she was protecting weighed heavily on her. Yet despite the immense pressure, Jeanne never wavered in her commitment. She drew strength from her faith, her love for the children, and her belief that what she was doing was right, no matter the cost. As the Allies advanced and the war neared its end, Jeanne's work became both more critical and more perilous. The Germans, desperate and vengeful, intensified their efforts to root out resistance members. Jeanne continued her work, helping to coordinate the final rescue missions and ensuring that as many lives as possible were saved. When Brussels was liberated in 1944, Jeanne was there, exhausted but relieved, knowing that the nightmare was finally over. But the end of the war was not the end of Jeanne's journey. Many of the children she had saved were now orphans, their parents lost to the camps. Jeanne dedicated herself to helping these survivors rebuild their lives, working with relief organizations and continuing to fight for justice and recognition for those who had suffered. Of individual courage and the profound difference one person's actions can make. One of the most dangerous missions Jeanne undertook during the war was in the industrial city of Liège, a place crawling with German soldiers and collaborators. The city had become a focal point for resistance activities, but it was also a hotspot for Gestapo operations. Jeanne's mission was to escort a group of Jewish children out of the city, using a network of safe houses that stretched across the Belgian countryside. The journey began under the cover of night. Jeanne, dressed in simple, unassuming clothes, led the children who had been given false identities and taught to recite their new names and stories. The group, consisting of 5 children between the ages of 4 and 12, had been hidden in a cellar for weeks, waiting for the right moment to escape. Jeanne knew that any mistake could be fatal, not just for her, but for the innocent lives in her care. As they moved through the city, Jeanne had to navigate a maze of checkpoints and patrols. The streets were eerily quiet, except for the occasional rumble of military trucks and the distant clatter of boots on cobblestone. Jeanne's heart pounded with every step, but she kept her fear in check, focusing on the task at hand. She had memorized the route meticulously, aware that a wrong turn could lead them straight into a Gestapo trap. The first leg of the journey involved crossing the Meuse River, which was heavily guarded. Jeanne had arranged for a small boat to take them across, operated by a local fisherman who was sympathetic to the resistance. As they approached the riverbank, Jeanne spotted a patrol boat in the distance. She quickly herded the children into the shadows, instructing them to stay silent. The patrol boat drifted closer, its searchlight sweeping across the water. Jeanne's mind raced, calculating their chances. She knew they couldn't stay hidden for long. If they were discovered, there would be no escape. As the patrol boat passed, Jeanne signaled to the fisherman, who swiftly guided them into the boat. The crossing was tense, the sound of water slapping against the hull mingling with the distant hum of the city. When they finally reached the other side, Jeanne felt a wave of relief, but the journey was far from over. They continued on foot, moving from one safe house to another. Each house was a lifeline, a brief refuge where the children could rest and eat before moving on. The safe houses were run by ordinary Belgians who had risked everything to help the resistance. In one such house, Jeanne encountered an elderly couple who had lost their own son to the war. They treated the children as if they were their own, offering them warm beds and food. Jeanne was touched by their kindness, but she knew they couldn't stay long. The Gestapo was always on the lookout for suspicious activity. The final stretch of the journey was the most perilous. They had to cross a heavily wooded area known to be patrolled by German soldiers. The forest was dense and dark, the path barely visible under the thick canopy of trees. Jeanne led the way, her senses heightened by the danger. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, made her heart race. They moved slowly, carefully, the children clinging to her for reassurance. At one point they heard voices. German soldiers were nearby. Jeanne quickly signaled for the group to hide, They crouched low, holding their breath as the soldiers passed. The tension was unbearable, the minutes stretching into what felt like hours. When the soldiers finally moved on, Jeanne urged the children forward, knowing that they were running out of time. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they reached the last safe house, a small farmhouse on the edge of the forest. The children were exhausted, their faces pale with fear and fatigue, but they were safe. Jeanne had done it. She had brought them out of the city, away from the clutches of the Germans. The mission in Liège was a turning point for Jeanne. It tested her resolve, her ability to stay calm under immense pressure, and her commitment to the cause. Word of her success spread quickly through the resistance network, earning her respect and admiration from her peers. Jeanne became known as someone who could be relied upon to undertake the most dangerous missions, a reputation that would follow her throughout the war. As the war dragged on, the Gestapo's efforts to crush the resistance became more brutal and desperate. Jeanne's success in rescuing Jewish children and evading capture had made her a target. The Gestapo was determined to capture the woman who had become a symbol of defiance against their regime. Jeanne's work had always required her to be cautious, but the pressure mounted as the Germans tightened their grip on Brussels. One of the most harrowing episodes in her life came when a trusted member of the resistance network was captured and, under torture, revealed critical information about Jeanne's activities. The betrayal was devastating, not only because it put Jeanne in immediate danger, but also because it compromised the safety of the children she was protecting. Jeanne learned of the betrayal through a coded message sent by a fellow resistance member. The message was clear. The Gestapo was closing in, and she needed to disappear. Jeanne had no time to lose. She quickly arranged for the children under her care to be moved to a new safe house, one that had not been compromised. As she made these arrangements, she was filled with a deep sense of foreboding. She knew that the Gestapo would not stop until they found her. Jeanne's next move was to go into hiding herself. She was forced to leave behind everything: her home, her belongings, even the close friends who had supported her throughout the war. With the help of the resistance, she was smuggled out of Brussels and into a remote part of the Belgian countryside. There, she stayed with a family who knew nothing of her true identity, living under an assumed name and pretending to be a distant relative from another part of the country. The months in hiding were some of the darkest of Jeanne's life. She was cut off from the resistance, unable to continue her work, and constantly fearful that the Gestapo would track her down. The isolation weighed heavily on her, and she struggled with the guilt of not being able to do more to help those still in danger. But Jeanne knew that she had to stay hidden. If she were captured, it would mean the end not only for her, but for countless others in the resistance. As the war neared its end, the Gestapo's grip on Belgium began to loosen. The Allied forces were advancing, and the German regime was crumbling. Jeanne, still in hiding, listened anxiously to the radio reports of the Allies' progress. The day she heard that Brussels had been liberated was one of immense relief, but also bittersweet. She knew that many of her friends and fellow resistors had not survived to see this day. When Jeanne finally emerged from hiding, she was a changed woman. The war had taken its toll, but it had also forged her into a symbol of resilience and courage. Her story, once confined to the shadows of the resistance, began to emerge into the light. Survivors and fellow resistors who had worked with Jeanne started to share their stories, painting a vivid picture of the woman who had risked everything to save others. Jeanne's fame grew in the post-war years, not because she sought it, but because the stories of her bravery could no longer be contained. She was invited to speak at various events, where she recounted her experiences, not to glorify her actions, but to honor the memory of those who had been lost, and to remind the world of the horrors of the Holocaust. Jeanne's humility and her steadfast refusal to see herself as a hero only endeared her further to those who heard her story. In the years that followed, Jeanne was honored by several organizations, but perhaps the most meaningful recognition came when she was named Righteous Among the Nations by Yad Vashem. This honor, bestowed upon non-Jews who had risked their lives to save Jews during the Holocaust, was a testament to Jeanne's extraordinary courage and humanity. Jeanne's rise to fame was not the result of a single act of bravery, but a lifetime of dedication to the principles of justice, compassion, and resistance against tyranny. Her story became a beacon of hope, and a reminder of the power of one person to make a difference in the face of overwhelming evil. As the dust settled after World War II, Europe found itself in a state of turmoil. The continent was grappling with the immense human cost of the war, the horrors of the Holocaust, and the complex process of rebuilding. For Jeanne Daman, the end of the war marked the beginning of a new struggle, one that was not fought on the front lines, but within herself. Jeanne had survived the war, but the experiences she had endured left deep scars. The weight of the lives she had saved, the friends she had lost, and the constant fear of being caught by the Germans had taken a toll on her psyche. Despite being hailed as a hero, Jeanne found it difficult to reconcile her wartime actions with the normalcy of peacetime life. The transition from resistance fighter to civilian was not easy, and Jeanne struggled with feelings of guilt and survivor's remorse. One of the most poignant moments in Jeanne's post-war life came when she was asked to testify about her experiences during the war. The trial was one of many that sought to bring Third Reich collaborators and war criminals to justice. Jeanne was hesitant at first. Speaking about the war meant reliving the trauma, opening wounds that had barely begun to heal. But she knew that her testimony could help bring justice to those who had suffered, and she agreed to take the stand. In the courtroom, Jeanne recounted her experiences with a calm and measured demeanor, but beneath the surface, she was reliving the terror of those years. She spoke about the children she had saved, the missions she had undertaken, and the friends she had lost to the Gestapo. The room was silent as Jeanne described the moment she learned of the betrayal that had nearly cost her life, and the subsequent months she spent in hiding. Her testimony was powerful, but it also took an emotional toll. After the trial, Jeanne found herself overwhelmed by the memories she had kept buried for so long. She withdrew from public life, retreating to a quiet village where she hoped to find peace. But the ghosts of the past were not easily silenced. Jeanne struggled with nightmares and flashbacks, her mind replaying the moments of danger and loss that had defined her wartime experience. It was during this period of introspection that Jeanne began to write about her experiences. At first, it was a private exercise, a way to process the trauma and make sense of the chaos. But as she wrote, Jeanne realized that her story was not just hers. It belonged to the children she had saved, the friends she had lost, and the countless others who had fought against the Germans. Writing became a form of therapy, a way to honor the memory of those who had not survived. Jeanne's writings eventually caught the attention of a historian who was researching the Belgian resistance. With his encouragement, Jeanne agreed to publish her memoirs. The book, titled In the Shadow of the Swastika, was a powerful account of her wartime experiences, detailing the courage and resilience of the resistance fighters and the unimaginable horrors they faced. The memoir was met with critical acclaim, bringing Jeanne's story to a wider audience and solidifying her legacy as a hero of the resistance. One of the most remarkable moments in Jeanne Daman's post-war life occurred many years after the end of World War II, during a visit to Israel. Jeanne had been invited to attend a ceremony at Yad Vashem, where she would be honored as one of the righteous among the nations. The trip was both a recognition of her bravery and a deeply emotional journey, as it brought her face to face with the people she had fought so hard to protect. The ceremony at Yad Vashem was a solemn and moving event. Jeanne stood alongside other honorees, each of them recognized for their extraordinary courage in the face of German persecution. As the ceremony concluded, a woman approached Jeanne with tears in her eyes. The woman, now in her 70s, introduced herself as Miriam, a name that immediately struck a chord with Jeanne. It was the name of one of the little girls Jeanne had saved during the war, though she had been too young at the time to remember much. Miriam explained that she had been one of the children Jeanne had helped smuggle out of Brussels and into hiding. For years, she had wondered about the woman who had risked everything to save her, but she had never been able to find out what had happened to Jeanne after the war. It wasn't until she saw Jeanne's name on the list of honorees at Yad Vashem that she realized she had finally found the person she had been searching for. The reunion was a powerful and emotional moment for both women. Miriam shared how she had been hidden in a Catholic convent for the remainder of the war, and how she had been reunited with her surviving family members afterward. She spoke of the life she had built in Israel, the family she had raised, and the gratitude she felt every day for the second chance at life that Jeanne had given her. For Jeanne, the reunion was a reminder of the lives she had touched, the people she had saved, and the enduring impact of her actions. It was a moment of validation, a reminder that her sacrifices had not been in vain. The two women spent hours talking, reminiscing about the past and sharing stories of their lives since the war. For Jeanne, meeting Miriam was a poignant reminder of why she had risked everything during those dark years. The story of Jeanne and Miriam's reunion spread, capturing the attention of the media and further solidifying Jeanne's reputation as a war hero. The encounter was featured in newspapers and television programs, bringing Jeanne's story to an even wider audience. But more importantly, it brought closure to a chapter of Jeanne's life that had been marked by uncertainty and loss. Jeanne Daman Scaglione's life was defined by her courage, compassion, and unwavering commitment to doing what was right, even in the face of overwhelming evil. Her actions during World War II saved countless lives and left an indelible mark on history. But Jeanne's story did not end with the war. Her post-war experiences, her struggles with trauma, and her eventual recognition as a hero all contributed to her enduring legacy. The stories of her missions in Liège, the betrayal she endured, her struggle to adjust to post-war life, and her emotional reunion with one of the children she saved, all paint a vivid picture of a woman who was not just a hero, but a deeply human figure. Jeanne's legacy lives on, not just in the lives she saved, but in the lessons she imparted to future generations about the power of individual courage and the importance of standing up against injustice. Jeanne Daman Scaglione passed away in 2006, but her story continues to inspire. She remains a symbol of resistance, a beacon of hope, and a reminder that even in the darkest times, there are those who will risk everything to protect the innocent. From her early days as a teacher in a Jewish kindergarten to her dangerous missions with the resistance, Jeanne's actions saved countless lives and left an indelible mark on history. In the years following the war, Jeanne Daman Scaglione's bravery was recognized far and wide. She was honored as one of the righteous among the nations by Yad Vashem, a testament to the lives she saved and the risks she took. Even in her later years, Jeanne remained humble about her role in the resistance. She often spoke about the importance of remembering the Holocaust, not just as a historical event, but as a lesson for future generations. Jeanne's life is a powerful example of the enduring impact